I don't give an F how much money I'm making. I want to kick your ass. And when I was able to get those kids together, then the process became, we're not worried about all the other things. Now let's worry about volleyball.
Paul MacDonald is a former NCAA Division I college volleyball coach turned broadcaster. After 17 years of coaching women's volleyball, Paul knows a thing or two about getting people around a common goal and achieving results. On today's episode, Paul discusses how he instilled focus and discipline in his athletes and how those same methods can help you accomplish your goals. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul MacDonald.
So in anticipation for our conversation today, you had sent over some of the info about John Dunning.
Yes.
The legendary Hall of Fame volleyball coach.
Yes.
And I actually went and did a little bit of additional research just because I was curious to see like what it is that you were looking at. And I found a quote from him. And this is one of my favorite types of quotes. He did not mean for this to be memorable at all, which is the reason that I immediately latched onto it. But the quote was, "If you're not a listener, I think you put serious limits on yourself." And that interested me for two reasons. One, in order to have any good conversation, you got to be a listener, right? And if you're going to try to get anyone to, follow your program, if you were a coach, listening to them is just as important as them listening to you. But the fact that and this is where my brain ended up going, the fact that as a coach, you were responsible for getting a bunch of college athletes to not just listen to you, buy into your program, but trust that the discipline you were trying to instill in them was going to pay off for them later on. So how did you do that? How do you do that with a bunch of college athletes, especially when you're trying to convince them, hey, this stuff that's probably uncomfortable for you right now in terms of physical conditioning or mental reps or all of these things, this is going to pay off for you later on. How do you do that, Paul?
You hit on it with the John Dunning line, and the listening is the hardest part. Probably heard the phrase, listen to understand, not listen to respond. The greatest challenge for me was learning to listen to understand, because in a team of 12 to 14, 18 to 22-year-olds, they all had a different manner of sharing and communicating. So the sooner that I could listen and begin to understand what they were getting at, the better. And that's something that was and still is, even in my current work, a work in progress. Because always when we're listening, aren't most people, while listening, trying to generate what their response will be?
Yes.
But instead they should be listening to. The more you listen to understand, then now you've made a more transformational connection rather than transactional. And that transformational relationship is difficult for any coach to player because there's an age difference, a maturity difference. So it's the listening to understand that I found to be the most important. And as long as my door was truly open, and it doesn't mean the door is open, it means I appear open to that conversation, then they can come and give me information that allows me to listen to understand. But particularly early in my career, I could have done a lot more understanding. Every coach is going to tell you what they'd like to change, but how do I get those athletes all on the same page? It begins by listening to understand why they're there in the first place. Not everybody came to play in college because they had a great coach. Some came because they loved the game. Some came because, well, I was athletic and my family got me started on volleyball, and that's just kind of where it ended up. And then you get a few that, had no sport pedigree. They're the first to ever play in college athletics. They're coming from an entirely different place. And in the case of women who I coached through the entirety of my career, much fewer of the women I coached had a mother figure that played sports, because that generation was the parents' generation was only just beginning to be embraced as hey, females can play sports and compete just as much. So with all that said, the challenge was getting to know where each one of those players was coming from, and then trying to guide from there. Now, obviously, understanding a senior who I've worked with for 4 years, so much easier than understanding a freshman who, while I've done recruiting calls, I'm only now just coaching them for the first few weeks, let's say.
Well, holy cow, and it's so funny you touched on what motivates each individual person and how to channel that for them, but then this whole group funneling toward the goal. One of the things that I know I've personally struggled with, and I have found that when I really struggle at achieving a goal, it's normally because I haven't clearly defined that goal for myself. And as I'm thinking about that and thinking about the challenge that you faced as a coach, once you have figured out what motivates all these individual players, how then do you start funneling that into the vision for the entire team? Because that can't be, I mean, that even thinking about it in those terms makes my brain hurt.
Well, and that's where some of the challenges came in. You hope that you recruit a group that wants to win. So the end funneled goal is victory. But what does victory look like? Not going to win every game. And where I was coaching, though you could say at almost every school, you're not going to win every game. So what does good winning look like? What does good losing look like? You can play a great match. One of the best matches I ever coached was for Francis Marion against Wingate University. I want to say it was like 2009 or 8 or something. That coach, now retired, is a Hall of Famer. And I knew after the fact, his name is Shelton Collier. After the game, I knew we had played a great game. And what I told the team was the only part of this that I think we all would rather have changed was the check mark that goes into the win or loss column. But I wouldn't change anything regarding the way this game was played, the effort. The scores were very, very competitive. That was a great loss. We had a bad loss. This was a bad win. It was against Coker College. In my career, I'm proud to say that Francis Marion had never lost to Coker in the matches that I coached. We at Francis Marion were in a better position than Coker during my career. So that was kind of an expected victory. We beat them 3-0. It was easily the worst volleyball game I had coached in probably 4 years. I went back into the locker room, and it wasn't fire and brimstone. I mean, you can't yell at them every single minute, every day. I wish I would have yelled even less during my career. But I told them, I said, Coker College, at the time was college, is the only team we could have beaten with this performance.
Mm.
Here are the reasons why about us. And it was not a single word about Coker's left side attacker barely being able to clear the net with an attack, or a setter that could barely set legally, and servers that gave us easy balls. But the conversation in the locker room was, this is a bad win. So when you talk about channeling getting the group to all kind of follow the mindset. I think it starts with the head coach in kind of defining and showing what expectations look like. Beating Coker is important, but playing the right way against Coker is most important.
You know, that automatically reminds me of another great coach that I'm sure you and most people are familiar with, one Nick Saban, who I can't remember which national championship it was, but Alabama was playing Notre Dame.
And good
And
for
they,
him that you can't even remember which of his titles you can pinpoint this conversation.
that's
So
how you know you're really successful, right? I don't know which of the five or six
that's
national
right.
championships it was, but I do remember it was against Notre Dame, and I do remember, I think it was AJ McCarron was the quarterback. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Anyway, Alabama was blowing them out. And there was an exchange between the quarterback and the center where they got their signals crossed. Quarterback had to do a quick timeout. And here they are winning by 2 or 3 touchdowns. And the quarterback and the center get into a shoving match in the middle of the field. And they asked Nick Saban about it later, like, what did you think about that? Or whatever. He goes, I loved it because they were still focused on the process, because that's what he drilled into them was process, process, process. Um, and that's funny. You're right. You can win badly or you can lose well. But I think if you stick to a process that's a good process, I imagine the rest will just take care of itself.
Right. And what's the rest for a Division II program? Did you leave the kids with a different perspective on what growth and doing well looks like? FMU does not have the resources to compete for a national title. So does that mean that the group is a failure because the group I brought together didn't win a national title? No. It's my belief that the group that we were able to put together, most years we at least approached what was the best our season could be. And now you mix in some injuries that can throw things off. In my 11 years, I had 2 years where we had really good teams, but when you have injuries to your top players, your hands are tied. But from a leadership standpoint, the process you mentioned Nick Saban. Many coaches are finally understanding that the better the process is stuck to, as long as the process is a good one, and clearly Nick Saban is defining and laying out a good process for which McCarron and his center were arguing. As long as the process is what it should be, then you've done all you can to ideally keep the team together, 12 to 14 players in my case, throughout the season. And it's a long season. It's fatiguing for any athlete or coach. So
How do you
pulling
know?
together in October becomes pretty tricky.
So how do you know, or at what point do you know that you have a good process? Because whether you're talking about sports or whether you're talking about just a person trying to accomplish their own goals, you may outline for yourself what you think is a good process. And as you're going along, it's going to take a little while before you get enough data to really judge whether this is working or not. Whether you're talking about volleyball or anything else, I guess I'll keep it to volleyball since that's what we're talking about. At what point did you know the process you were implementing with a group year to year was working well? What was it in before you even played a game in practice? Was it in the middle of the season? How did you figure out, okay, this is a good process that we need to keep going? At what point did you realize that?
Big picture, it took a few years because I had some good mentors. They seem to have it down, but when it's time for your own process that has your own fingerprints on it, it then kind of changes. When I was at Mount Mercy College, part of that school had no athletic scholarship funds in a conference and in a division that had scholarship funds. So the process for me started with the kinds of kids that would disregard the fact that they had a scholarship or not, they didn't, and say, I don't care. And in my mind, since we want this to be a PG process, PG podcast or conversation, I want the I don't give an F how much money I'm making. I want to kick your ass. And when I was able to get those kids together, then the process became, we're not worried about all the other things. Now let's worry about volleyball. And what I found for me, and John, you know me well, I like to talk and I like to ramble. The more I learned to refine exactly what I wanted to do and instruct individually for each position, and then instruct how they interact, because in volleyball, it takes multiple contacts and some interaction to succeed. One star alone still is probably not going to carry a team. So the process for me was kind of twofold. How do I teach a position player? How do I teach them to interact with the other positions on the court? And then for me, the process was, as soon as I could, put the team in a position where they could call their own plays. Because I didn't need them looking over at me, because there's only about 6 to 8 seconds between points. So I needed to prepare them, and my process involved a lot of team or connected play, such that once it was time to put jersey on, my job was not done, but my job was giving subtleties like, hey, Carrie, let's see a little bit more right side zone setting. Either because the opponent's block was weak or because our right side hitter is really good. Or, hey, libero, you're trying to pass way too perfectly. We don't need a 3-point pass, which is the best pass in most volleyball speak. Give me a 2-point pass that my setter can get to. Let her do the rest. You don't have to be perfect or feel like the burden is entirely on you. So the process from a team standpoint was very much getting it into their hands. And I've only kind of answered your question. Question is how? It depends. If you've got a bunch of players that are vocal outward leaders, they'll tell you what they want. But there are quiet players who are really, really good and are just as much a winner, and that are introverted. Had one that was super quiet. Her name was Ashley Crook. Really good, hammer of an arm. But it took me a long time to understand that I needed to listen to understand. I needed to meet her where she was. I'm not going to suddenly turn her into an extrovert. I'm not going to turn her into John Sweeney. I might be able to get her to open up a little bit, but I needed to meet her where she was. So now you've got these introverts and extroverts all with the challenge of getting them to the same process. So depending on the season, it would really depend on that give and take regarding the personality of the players, plural, to try to get the process of the game and the video study and the how should it feel when it's 20-20. You should feel pretty amped up, but if you're overamped, you're going to hit it too hard. If you're underamped, you're going to get your butt kicked. So where is your mental state? So I've kind of jumped around on that process.
No, no,
But
no. That
it
covered.
really depends. Like if I was coaching you, John, my approach would be very different than that if I was coaching someone who is known to be mostly a quiet person, even if they had the same IQ as John Sweeney, as impossible as that
That
is.
person doesn't exist. I am a
Right.
league of
Well,
my
this is
own.
all theoretical. So,
Naturally. I appreciate
right.
you pointing that out.
But coaching you, John, would be a little different because as soon as we open a dialogue, you'd start saying, "Well, but hey, when you told me this, I thought that, and can you help me with this?" For somebody who's not as communicative, it may not be a word, but I think uh, the that's where the coaching changes to, all right, this is what I observed. Tell me what you're feeling right now. Tell me where
Well,
your mental state is, etc.
and it's one thing we've talked about up till now, listening and setting a process up for people that you're coaching. Now I'm curious what it's like doing that for the most difficult person to coach, you.
But before we get to that, some exciting news. Introducing the Stories with Sweeney t-shirt shop. Whether you want to represent your new favorite podcast or enjoy classic patriotic t-shirt designs, you'll find it all at the Stories with Sweeney t-shirt shop on Bonfire. Plus, for a limited time only, you can pick up a t-shirt design inspired by today's guest. That will be revealed at the end of this video, so stick around for that. Otherwise, click on the link in the description below and start shopping. And now, back to the show.
Because whether it's volleyball, trying to prepare yourself as a coach, or broadcasting, preparing for a game, or just in life, it's obviously a totally different thing when you're dealing with the external versus you're the one having to motivate, discipline, hold yourself to the process. What lessons did you take from coaching that you've been able to apply? Let's focus on broadcasting, from the aspect of you prepared for the game, you got these college women to prepare for this game, for these games you played. How did you apply those lessons to yourself when you're trying to prepare for a broadcast?
Some of that is some of that transition or of skills from the giving it to the athletes to myself is hard. I started broadcasting from scratch, truly. There are people that I've worked with who have broadcasting degrees, producers who do it for a living. I would love to do it for a living someday, but as a freelancer, I get a lot of good experience. But learning has been hard. So what did I apply from coaching to applying to myself in life, whether it's broadcasting or otherwise? It's really the phases of the day. I tried to teach this to the athletes, and I lived it a bit as a coach as well, but the phases of the day for me are so important. Most of the time I'm up at 10 to 5, but I try to do the exact same thing almost every day or time in the morning. If I'm focused on what I'm going to do at work at 8:30, I'm not going to make my coffee as well. So important phase of the day, make the coffee, right? So I know that's pretty simple. But when it's time for a broadcast, that's the phase also. In today's day and age, we have mobile blips and things dinging on our computers and other things that, social media that grab our attention. They are shrewd in how they do it. They do a great job. So when it's time to train for broadcasting, and I say train, I try to shut all of that off and I just work on broadcasting. So a phase for me would be if we've got a game on a Friday night, then Thursday morning, if not sooner, there's an interview with the coach. So the day before, I take 20 minutes uninterrupted and just research the team, come up with some questions that would allow for some compelling conversation that we could put online, or meaning in the show or the game. Those 20 minutes are dedicated to coming up with those questions. But then when it's time to get my daughter out of bed, well, that's a good time, even if that's hard. So what I don't do is run around with a pad writing down questions while I'm getting ready to pick up my daughter, because I'd prefer to give undivided time when possible to whatever I'm giving. Sometimes it's not possible, right? We all understand that. I've got a daughter. I know, John, you've got family as well. And, if Claire comes in and has something that she wants to say, I want to give her that undivided attention, even if I'm on a computer. But the phases of the day become so important. So Wednesday, 20 minutes to come up with questions. Thursday morning, interview. And the interview could go in a number of directions. You have to listen in an interview more than you ask the questions, because they'll answer half your questions for you in the first sentence. But now you've got to take the conversation where it goes. That interview is done. Get ready to go to work. When I'm at work, I try my best to work on whatever phase I'm working on. Give an hour, hour and a half to a certain project. And then that evening, I'm writing my cheat sheets with the rosters on them. Try to give about a half an hour to an hour to write those out. I write them because they help me remember. Some people like to do them on their computer entirely. I use highlighters, but a lot of others do too. And then go through the pronunciations, because you can do everything right, but if you screw up somebody's name, that's all they'll remember for the entire show. And in the sports world, they'll all call them shows. So if I've got a game on Friday night, hey, we got a show Friday night. You excited about the show? So what did I glean from what I taught my players that I'm trying to do is to have those phases so that whatever I'm doing, it gets my undivided attention.
What do you do when those phases get disrupted? Because as you were talking, a lot of this, I'm a golfer. I've played golf my whole life. Staying in the present is a huge thing for golfers. I remember reading as a kid a book, Golf is Not a Game of Perfect, by Dr. Bob Rotella, a sports psychologist. And this was a huge thing that he talked about. But one of the things that came out of that, I remember he told a story in that book where he said he was lecturing at a conference, and this guy at the conference raises his hand and he says, "It's all well and good you're talking about staying in the present. That sounds pretty easy to me." And Bob Rotella goes, "Go with me on this. Who do you think is the sexiest woman in the world?" And this was back in the 80s. So the guy goes, "Cindy Crawford." And he said, "My goodness, this is a coincidence. It turns out Cindy Crawford is staying at this hotel, and she is really wanting you to come up to her room when all of this is finished and get to know you better, if you know what I mean." And in the audience, the guy's face is turning red. I'm keeping this PG still, Paul. I'm following your example. And Bob Rotella goes, "There's only one catch to all this. You are not allowed to think of Cindy Crawford between now and the end of this conference, which is about 45 minutes. And he goes, "Now, you've probably thought of Cindy Crawford in 1,000 different ways since I, said don't think about Cindy Crawford." A lot of and he was saying in the context of golf, a lot of these guys are trying to win major championships. They've been dreaming about it their whole lives. Whether you're trying to win a major championship or a national championship or just trying to beat, Coker College because you have to or you're expected to, we all get ahead of ourselves. When your phases get disrupted, what's a way that you try to pull yourself back in? Whether it's your daughter interrupts you in the middle of something, or whether maybe your mind just isn't focusing the way that you want it to. What do you try to do when those phases get disrupted to get yourself back on track?
Sometimes it's because I have artificially set those phases, and maybe I need a break. Sometimes it's not even interruption. If there is an interruption and I can get right back to whatever that phase is, that probably tells me that I'm either really into that phase, and we're not all into every phase that we have. Some parts of my work, it's like, I don't really want to work on copier rates that I have to charge to our employees. Not exciting. Easy to be interrupted or easy to be distracted. So if that's the case, then maybe it is I want to be distracted. I'll step away and take 5 minutes, because particularly in work and in sport, if you're not giving or getting your best, then what's the point of phases or whatever? You could break it up however you want. So sometimes it's the phase is too long. For some people, and this goes back to coaching, and I stand by this, sometimes the phases you've never trained on it before. I used to give this lesson to my athletes every year. Well, really the high school kids. I would hear the statement, "I'm not good at taking tests." And my answer was, I believe you, but do you practice what taking tests looks like? So, kid in high school has to literally sit for 20 minutes uninterrupted and fill out this form that decides how smart you are. That's a test, right? But if at home they say, well, I'm studying, but I've got my social media on, I got my music on, I got a TV in the background, I'm not actually training the environment that I'm going to be immersed in to take that test. So now, how long is a phase, and how does that work with your brain? I don't want to get too far into it, but motor behavior, which I studied in graduate school, instructs that you are actually your best study is without interruption. Now, everybody says, well, I like a little music in my background. I like a little this. That means that you just divided your mental time. That's fact. Now, I like the music in the background may not be the worst thing in the world, because if you have a construction company pounding away next door, about the only thing you can do to soothe your head and study a little bit is to have that music in the background. So I would never dismiss it. That sort of thing is no, but the idea of the phases then becomes, what's a realistic phase? If an hour and a half is too long, then maybe I need to break it up and instead do an hour on something and then switch to something else. Maybe it's with the copier, it's a hard one. I'm being very frank. It's not exciting, has to get done. I do that one in little snippets of 20 minutes to a half an hour, because after a while, it's just blah. It's not exciting. It's kind of droll, but it has to be done. So now the phases, how you lay them out, how you build them makes sense, but make more sense. If
All
I
part
were,
of your own process. If
yes,
you have built a good process, then it can
if you,
withstand when it's disrupted or under pressure.
yes. I wake up at about 10 to 5 every day. I know I hinted on that earlier. I can almost do that without an alarm clock. One of the phases of your body is sleep. And if you listen to your body will tell you when you really need to go to sleep. And if you listen even closer, your body will tell you when to wake up, as long as you're well. As long as, if you're sick, you're going to sleep longer. But sleep and rest, that's a phase. If you screw up that phase, the rest of your day.
Well, to wrap up here, and I want to thank you for your time, and I've really enjoyed the conversation and listening to, like I said, we're friends, we've talked before, but I've not had the opportunity to delve this far into your coaching career, and it's interesting to extract some of these lessons. In our show prep for this, you sent a couple of different books, and it's funny. I'm always on the lookout for I hate to say self-improvement book, but a book on time management. I guess self-improvement. Whatever. I get caught up on terms. You'd send a few that I'm not familiar with, and I know that there are some others we've talked about that we've both read. But one that you three that you sent over first was "Getting to Yes" by Roger Fisher and William Ury. "How We Know What Isn't So" by Thomas Gilovich, and then "You Are a Badass" by Jen Cicero. I can't remember from the notes I'm looking at here. You said one in particular, and maybe it was a different book entirely, had a profound impact that sort of gave you a revelatory moment.
Yes, that was How to Be Everything.
How to Be Everything. And you've talked about that before.
Yes.
I'm curious because I've got my reading list and that book's on it. What was it about that book that was so revelatory for you?
We get taught early on in our lives that there's a cookie cutter way to go about your life. You go to school, you meet the love of your life, you get married, have a job that lasts 40 years, and you have a trajectory of some sort there. You have children, and these all happen at specific times. You have kids by 30. You have the job you're going to have for the rest of your life. Well, you started that at 22. None of those things worked for me because my brain is all over the place. I had a passion for music, so I started music performance in college. When I learned I was going to go broke, I finished a business degree, but fell in love with coaching while playing volleyball and decided to drop 5 years of regular business employment to go get a graduate degree so I could coach volleyball. Burned out due to some challenges that I had not expected at Francis Marion, and ended up going back to business. None of that is cookie cutter to what I described just a moment ago. The book, How to Be Everything, really was more of a comforting moment to say that you can have multiple interests, even multiple employment streams. That is not, the cookie cutter life is not the only acceptable way to explore your life. And thank God I read it, because I never understood if it was okay to have, for me, what are almost 3 and hopefully maybe even a 4th different career during my lifetime. And what that book says is that you're not alone. You can get married when you're in your late 30s. It's not too late. And in fact, that happened for me. We had our daughter when I was 44. Fortunately, my wife is a little younger than me, but having a child at age 44, not cookie cutter. I have friends who I graduated with who their children have children. And I didn't live the cookie cutter life. So How to Be Everything was certainly moving. How to Get to Yes has helped me in every line of life. I've actually read it 3 different times throughout, whether it was as a coach or whether it was as a business person. Getting to yes simply means, in negotiation or in life, what is it you're trying to get at, and is that realistic? I would love to get to yes and uncover a fortune of $100 million, but that's not getting to yes. That's getting to magic, and I don't study magic. But getting to yes is, what's the best outcome what's the outcome you can live with, and how are you shooting for the best outcomes and in getting to yes. And what I also believe is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not, for me to win, you don't have to lose. In business, obviously in coaching, for your opponent must lose for you to win. There's no other way about it. But so in that getting to yes, the BATNA, and I'm quoting from that book, is the most important part. It's the best alternative to negotiated agreement. So what if you had your negotiated end goal, what's the best alternative you could still live with? And that one goes into deep detail as to what that looks like and determining what your best alternative is. And even if the alternative is, if I don't get that, I must walk away. Walking away from a negotiation is probably the hardest thing to do, but it's often the best thing to do. I'll take this one on a tangent. Bobby Knight says that the hardest answer to give is yes, and the easiest answer is no, because no is consistent. No is no. I tell one athlete or one employee no. No can be across the board, but once I tell yes to somebody, I have to tell yes to everybody else. I don't agree in being a no person. I try to be more positive, but getting to yes, but yes versus walking away and the no are very important there.
So I think, though, with that, just to add on to that, the Bobby Knight quote, which I'm familiar with, but hearing it framed in that context maybe see it a little different. It's funny, if you're a people pleaser like me, yes is the answer that I give a lot. It's what I'm compelled to give. But especially when you're trying to reach a goal, it does make things a lot more difficult because now you've become committed to achieving someone else's goal, oftentimes at the detriment of your own. That's hard, though, because it makes you feel, like you just said, negative, or it makes you feel like you are somehow being selfish. But if you've got this focus, and especially if you're a coach and others are depending on you, or if you're the head of if you're a member of a family or whatever, or if you are just super committed to that goal, yes ought to be. You ought not to say yes unless it is explicitly helping you achieve what you want.
Yes, well, and there are other, I forget now who said this, it's Mark Cuban. Unless it's an absolute 100% hell yes, then it's a no. Because if it's not something that absolutely ambitiously, excitedly, and with great production and use of your time as a yes, then it should be a no. And I just thought of this now, but if I'm ever to be as good as I want to be, there will be more than 24 hours demanded of me in any day. I'm going to have to say no.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be the best broadcaster I can be, I'm still learning this. I need to say no to certain things and say enthusiastically yes to certain things as well.
Well, I know I won't make you say no, we can't go on, because I know we should start wrapping up. Although I could continue talking and I've got 1,000 other questions, I'll have to have you back for another episode. But
I'd be
before
thrilled.
I say adios, or you say may I leave and I say yes, where's a good place if people want to learn more about you or your broadcasting? Where can they go to learn that?
Yeah, I have a website, but I apologize in advance. A 52-year-old website designer, you're going to get a less than as modern as possible website. It's Paul MacDonald Broadcast storieswithsweeney.com, and I always put what my next games are and where to find them. And I'd be thrilled. I also write some sport articles. In keeping with the how to be everything, I also love to write. But that's where you can go to see me, and hopefully there'll be more on that website, meaning I'm doing more as the basketball season begins, and then on to baseball and softball in the spring.
And I would describe the design of your website as minimalist and efficient. So, good things.
I'll take it.
Paul MacDonald, thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with my friend Paul. Please be sure to check out his website. A link is in the description below. And now, without further ado, that t-shirt design that I promised, inspired by today's conversation with Paul MacDonald, here it is. As you can see, the handsome Stories with Sweeney logo in yellow this time on the front and on the back. Now we can play volleyball. So if you've got someone in your life who enjoys volleyball, or if you just need a reminder to stay focused and disciplined, check out that shirt. Again, you can check that shirt out as well as all of the others, including patriotic designs, at our Stories with Sweeney t-shirt shop at Bonfire. The link to that is in the description below. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We will see you all right here next time.